So here is kind of my current evolution of an immersive experience. It's an experience that is so compelling that you actually change behavior or your outlook. You try to fit in and assimilate, and you actually take on characteristics of the surroundings.
Tap into innovation at IAAPA Expo, the biggest industry event of the year.
Join us and other attraction pros in Orlando, Florida, November 18th to the 22nd to engage with the global community.
Learn from the experts, leave with new ideas, and turn your passion for the industry into new possibilities.
Register now using the link in the show notes to save up to 30%.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic.
Don't you mean fantastico?
Is that an Italian word?
I think so.
Then yes, that's exactly what I mean. That's exactly what I mean. Why do you bring up Italian words?
I'm just reminiscing the trip to Italy I took a few years ago. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Did you have any lessons from that trip?
I did, actually. I learned that skiing in the Italian Alps is more challenging than skiing on the landfills in Detroit, Michigan.
I could see that.
Yeah.
I could see that. I could see that.
Why'd you ask if I had any lessons?
Well, because I just went to Italy, my wife and I, and we had some lessons that I thought might be interesting to talk about.
I'm picking up a trend from you and your travel habits. And a lot of the big trips that you've taken recently have been to countries that start with I.
They have. So we've got to find some more countries to go to that start with I.
There you go. You went to Iceland, you went to Ireland, and now Italy.
And it's a complete coincidence. We didn't plan it at all. In fact, the trip to Ireland and the trip to Italy were for the same reason. Because, as you know, my wife does a lot of genealogy research, and that's what originally brought us to Ireland, because some friends of ours here in North Carolina, my wife found, I had nothing to do with it. She found a relative over in Ireland, so we accompanied that couple to Ireland, and that's exactly the same reason why we went to Italy a couple weeks ago.
So the reason was not to find one of the greatest hot dogs in the world.
No, that was Iceland.
Oh, right, Iceland. I'm getting them confused. Yes. Iceland and Ireland. Yes.
So many lessons, but yes. So we went to Italy, and
you can't even keep track of them anymore.
I can't even keep track. But like you, when we go places, your eyes are always open, and there's always something that sort of strikes you about the experience that could be a lesson, that could be a leadership lesson, could be a guest experience lesson, could be just a kind of an overall life lesson. And I've really enjoyed the opportunities to be able to share those with you and the Attraction Pros audience. So I thought, let's do it again for Italy.
Cool. So for context, Italy has a lot of great destinations within it. Can you share a quick overview of your itinerary?
Sure. So we flew into Milan, or as they say in Italy, Milano, and I spent a couple of days there, just kind of touring the city and kind of getting to know that area. And then we drove up to Breno, which is kind of northeast-ish of Milano. And that's where my friends' relatives live. So we met Giovanni and Gabriella and Renato up in Breno, B-R-E-N-O. We also visited a very small town called Lausanne. There's a billion different ways to say it. I think I'm saying it right. Um, and that is where my friend Phil's and his cousin Giovanni's ancestors first lived when they were in Italy. That's where they have kind of followed the records back to this small town. So we visited that small town, spent most of our time in Breno, about three days there, and then we spent a day at Lake Como, and then we drove back down to Milan and flew home from there.
Well, I'm not in the least bit jealous whatsoever.
Nor should you be. No, you should be. I don't know.
Well, I am. You know what's cool about the small towns in Italy, from my observation for visiting a few of them that I believe, if I'm following your itinerary correctly, was just a little bit west of that, is that they don't feel like small towns, or they're so concentrated and so well dense. We're used to driving through, small towns in the US. You're driving through farmland and cornfields and like occasionally kind of a smattering of buildings and businesses or maybe a main street, but they seem to be built up and very community centric, which was really cool to see and extremely historic. And they're all like over 1,000 years old.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, the town of Breno that we were in, you could walk the little cobblestone streets and the buildings are like this close to each other. If you're not watching on YouTube, it's a very, very narrow streets. Like maybe one car can get through there. And I asked Giovanni, our host, when were some of these buildings built? And he said some go back to the 15th century. So, I mean, they've been around for a long, long time. And so it was really cool to kind of step back in time a little bit. And a lot of those places, you could see the kind of the central square. A lot of those places, I don't know if you saw this when you were in Italy, but they have the fountains in the towns where the water is actually being, kind of piped down from the mountains. And then it goes right into a fountain, and it's there. It's fresh water all the time. So it's like a drinking fountain. So you can go up there, get some nice fresh water, and it came directly from the mountains.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
very, very cool. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Cool.
You want to get to some lessons?
I can't wait to hear what you learned from this trip.
All right. Well, it's going to be another I word that I want to spend a lot of time on, and a lot of things that kind of bubble up under this particular heading, and it's immersion. Because we've talked about that a lot as it relates to attractions and immersive experiences and immersive attractions and all those type of things. And maybe because that was on my mind while I was over there, I really noticed when I was truly immersed in an experience, I noticed things that pulled me out of the experience. I noticed kind of what brought me into that experience, and maybe some of the things that we'll talk about today can be applied to various attractions and experiences. Because I didn't ride any roller coasters. I didn't go to any of those type of attractions. I did do some touristy things, but there were lots of opportunities, lots of experiences that I had where I really thought about immersion throughout that experience.
So you have, when we did your Iceland trip, you talked about immersive experiences, and it's kind of been peppered in throughout some conversations. I feel like you've got an evolving definition of the word immersion or maybe immersive experience. So where is it at right now?
It's so interesting you asked that, because that's where I wanted to start. I wanted to start with the evolution of my definition of immersive experiences. So this wasn't planned, and for anybody listening, I did not prompt Josh to ask me that. But
I'll
then,
go into all of these blinds, your Coaster Nerd Con, your international travel, all these.
so I did want to start there. So here is kind of my current evolution of an immersive experience. It's an experience that is so compelling that you actually change behavior or your outlook. You try to fit in and assimilate, and you actually take on characteristics of the surroundings. So I'll let that marinate. Would love to get your thoughts.
Some silence for dramatic effect. You change behavior and you assimilate to the surrounding.
Yes.
Can you read it again?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's an experience that's so compelling that you change behavior or outlook. You are also trying to fit in or assimilate your behavior to the surroundings, and you take on characteristics of the people or the environment that you're in.
Can you give two examples? One being from your trip to Italy and one being from the attractions industry.
So for my trip to Italy, it had everything to do with language because obviously, as we would listen to people speaking Italian, you kind of pick it up. So there was a time when we took a tour on the top of the main Milano cathedral. They call it the Duomo, and we were literally on top of it. It's a rooftop tour, and there was somebody that was basically saying, "Hey, you can go ahead of us." So they said, "Prego, prego,"
Hmm.
which my understanding meant welcome. And actually, in my pre-trip research, I thought that's what you would say at the end of an interaction. Like somebody would say, thank you, and you would say, prego, as you're welcome. But they were saying it on both ends. So we started noticing this Uber drivers and people at hotels and on tours and things like that. Prego had a lot of different meanings. So that became kind of part of our vernacular. Did I change my behavior in how I said you're welcome and thank you? Absolutely. Did I want to assimilate into the environment? Absolutely. So I think that's kind of what, and it was compelling because it was happening all the time. So that's an experience from Italy. Now, when you ask for an experience from the attractions world, are you asking for me as a guest or me as a operator
Or an observer.
or an observer? Okay.
Mhm.
Um, well, I'll give you kind of I guess, a most recent example was on Coaster NerdCon. When you are in line in a queue for an attraction, to me, that's its own separate culture, right in there. So you kind of assimilate to your surroundings, and that could be if you're in the back and forth, like you're making eye contact with people sometimes, or you're even saying hello, or you are making jokes with people that you'll never ever see again, except for the next time you pass them in the queue, right?
Mhm.
So there was that sort of assimilation or kind of embracing the situation that you were in, that it actually changed your behavior. Would I say hello to those people, in a different situation? Maybe, maybe not. But in that situation, in that experience, that's what led me to change that behavior and try to assimilate my behavior into the quote unquote culture that I was in.
What's interesting about that is we could look at it a few different ways in the attractions industry, and you shared it as being this is the environment that they're in, and these are the behaviors of other guests around it. Uh, and when people think of immersive experience, you're now thinking of theming and you're thinking of maybe intellectual property and all that of you walking into the wizarding world and you are a muggle who is visiting and you're now actually speaking in that language with the team members and maybe with other guests, or it could just generally be this is the way people act in this certain particular environment.
Yeah.
So I like this evolving definition that you have of immersion and the immersive experience because there's so many legs to it. It can go in so many different directions. You also said you could look at it from the perspective of the operator, the team member. What would that look like?
Well, I think that's where I might have gone more toward the Harry Potter or the Galaxy's Edge type of experience, where you are actually the one creating the immersive experience, or looking at how I can fully and further immerse the people that are in our environments into the operations, so that they will want to speak the language, or they will want to assimilate to our behaviors and those type of things. And Harry Potter and Galaxy's Edge are great examples, but we've also talked about that a grocery store can be an immersive experience.
Mhm.
So I don't think there's any shortage of opportunities out there to create an immersive experience. An FEC can be an immersive experience, a bowling alley. Like, if that's all that someone is thinking about and they've changed their behavior to assimilate to that environment, to me, that's kind of my evolving definition now of immersion. And so to me, I think it's a wider definition than just thinking about an attraction or putting on a headset, or technology that creates immersion. There's so many more ways for us to create immersion, and that's going to lead to one of my, I want to leave it to the end, takeaways in how we can create immersion for our employees.
So do you think that it's, ooh, I do want to hear that. Do you think that part of it is and I'm trying to look at it from all the different examples that you shared. It's almost like the permission to act a certain way that might liberate you from the structural parameters of conformity. I don't know why I just used too many like unnecessary big words, but it's like this is how you are expected to act when you're at the grocery store. Maybe be cordial and stay out of people's way and don't block the aisle with the cart. This is how you are expected to act after you just hit a turkey in a bowling alley, right? Uh, I hope no one was worried about the end of that sentence, right? Where that sentence was going. Right? If you're bowling and you get 3 strikes in a row, right? You're cheering. You would not do that in the grocery store when your favorite milk is back in stock, right? Or something, or something like in a similar type of environment. The different environments that then inspire people to act and behave in certain ways that they then take that with their experience. You talk about how you updated your vernacular in the way and you using Prego and talking to people and everything that was Matt on vacation in Italy. You're now back in North Carolina and now that's gone, right? And now like you encapsulated that in that moment during that experience.
Yes, and I can tell that it's something that has changed my behavior because I still want to do it now. Like,
Mm.
like it became a habit. I was only over there for a week, but it became a habit to say prego or grazie mille or, all those type of things. And so now that's, well, not now. I've been back for a little while, but when I first got back, that was my go-to phrase. That's what I wanted to say. You know what I mean? So I could tell that that's what that my behavior had changed and my thought process had changed a little bit. I do also want to address what you just said there in all those big words, because that was another one of my takeaways that I thought was so important, is that it's going to sound, I'm going to use different words than you did, but I think we're going to be saying the same thing, where you have to be ready and have permission, even give your permission of yourself to be immersed, right?
Mhm.
So think about it even from a store perspective, right? When you are out in the parking lot, you're probably in a slightly different mindset than when you walk into, you walk through the doors and you walk into a store, whether it's a clothing store or a grocery store or wherever it might be. Same thing with a theme park. You're kind of in the parking garage. I'm thinking of, Islands of Adventure. You're walking through City Walk, you go across the bridge, you walk through the gates, you hear the music. You're in a different mindset as you are going from the parking garage. Where did I park? Take a picture of the sign, all those practical things. And then you get into this kind of world of fantasy. When I first started getting into retail a little bit, when I was working at Valley Fair and I had a small retail operation, I was trying to learn more about how it worked. I knew nothing about retail. So I started reading a couple books, and they all talked about the runway that you have in a retail store. So when you go in, the first thing you see might be a display of shirts and things like that, but there's also a lot of other things that pull your attention, back to areas where you're supposed to be. For example, if you're going for suits or menswear, it's on one side, or dresses and women's wear, it's usually on the other side. And so you are now kind of drawn to where you're going to go, but there's that amount of time that it takes for you to walk through that door and be mentally ready to say, okay, this is where I want to go. This is what I want to look for. And now you're more in that mindset. And there's a similar mindset, I think, into, are you ready to be immersed? Right? Because you could have all kinds of things going on in your life. You could have all kinds of things, going on with your job, and your mindset isn't there. Like, I'm not ready to suspend my disbelief to think that I am, if we go back to the jump experience, right, that I am actually base jumping in a squirrel suit, but I'm really in a very safe environment. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So there's
Yeah.
got to be an opportunity for your mind to shift from the practicality of parking the car, for example, to now I'm ready to base jump.
Crossing the chasm.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, we could go a lot deeper into that, or we can get to the rest of the lessons. You
Okay.
you choose which way we're gonna go.
Let's go to the rest of the lessons.
Okay, what's number two?
So I think for me, what I noticed is that the more I was immersed, the more I wanted to be immersed. Okay. So in Iceland, I talked about, crawling under the glacier, right? And I love that experience. Here, one of the ways that I felt like I was being immersed was hearing people speak in Italian. I didn't understand 99% of what they were saying. But as we were on that rooftop tour on top of the cathedral, there was a couple of violinists that were going to play. And so we're all waiting there. And what was really cool too is the respect that everybody gave the musicians. That could probably be a whole nother conversation. But as soon as they walked up to the microphones and they started kind of tuning up a little bit, everybody on the cathedral rooftop went silent, right? It was like you could hear a pin drop up there. But what I'm getting to when I talk about, the more I'm immersed, the more I want to be immersed, is that they started playing a very beautiful piece. It was a sunset tour, so you could look over and see the sun setting, between all the ornate fixtures of the cathedral, and it was a beautiful setting. It was beautiful music, the whole thing. We're taking it all in, and in between pieces, the violinist would tell us what pieces they were just playing and what they're about to play. And the first thing they do is they start speaking in Italian, which I'm like, great, we're in Italy. They should be doing that. And then they said it all in English. And as much as I appreciated it, because I don't understand Italian, it actually took me out of the moment for a minute because I was like, here I am in Italy on top of this cathedral, listening to some music, watching the sunset. I'm fully immersed in experiencing this whole Italy thing. And now I'm being reminded that I'm a tourist and that this is not my home, if that makes sense. Like, it's not that I shouldn't be there, but they're making an accommodation because they know that there's probably people up there that don't speak the native language.
Hmm.
So I'm a little conflicted on that. Like, I appreciate that they did that, but at the same time, I'm like, it pulled me out of the immersion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I totally get it. I'm actually now thinking of when I visited Disneyland Paris and kind of went through the same thing. Like they would at one of the rides, like they give like the safety instructions in French and then in English, which okay, if they're safety instructions and they get a lot of British or American tourists, then that actually
Sure,
makes a lot of
sure.
sense to do that. Uh, did it feel like it took away from, well, okay, let me ask you this question. When you're not in Italy or Iceland or Ireland, you are visiting a lot of theme parks and you are that tourist and you are in a created environment. The story that you just described is full of authenticity and history, and you were at the real deal. Did it feel like it pulled some of the not to say it pulled some of the authenticity away. I think I'm recognizing like why you're conflicted here, even trying to like structure the question because I know like it was a good experience and it was all for positive reasons, but it made you feel like you were at the places you're used to visiting more often, like theme parks, when you went on distinctly a trip that was not.
I think so. Like I said, what I think it did is it mentally pulled me away from being in Italy. Like,
Hmm.
because not that I'm on a lot of cathedral roofs, here in the US, but I could have been as they're speaking to me in English, right?
Right.
But because I knew I was in Italy, the cathedral, the whole thing, I guess I wanted to stay in Italy.
Hmm.
And it made me recognize how important what you're thinking at that moment can be in the immersive experience because it was like a split second and my mind took me to another place. And then of course when they started playing again, I was able to come back, but it was a very interesting and still sort of I'm not sure how I feel about it kind of thing.
So tying in with your new current evolving definition is that you changed your behavior and you were assimilating. You didn't feel like a tourist, you felt sort of one with the experience. And then
Mhm.
by accommodating your needs of allowing for you to actually understand what the piece was, that it it dismissed your assimilation to it. It dismissed your change in behavior
Maybe.
rather than pull you deeper into it.
Yeah. like as I reflect on what would have made that better, if anything, is if they just didn't speak in English.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, the violinists were amazing. Like I said, the crowd got super quiet and everybody had, just rapt attention on the musicians and just taking it all in. Um, so again, I'm a little conflicted, but I just think I could have stayed in the moment had they not spoken in English. And
Mhm.
it's not a slight on their part. I'm not, giving feedback to say they shouldn't do it, but maybe this is where, you look at the overall experience for me, and I can only speak for myself. Would did them explaining the music that they just played in English enhance my experience? I would honestly say no.
Do you
Like,
remember any of it?
no, I don't. So
That might help your point,
yeah,
right?
like I
It
would
didn't
have.
matter what they were saying unless you were unless you were truly deeply connected to the music and thinking, oh boy, I wish I either knew what they were playing or spoke Italian.
Right.
Which there could be that person who might sitting there
There
and
could
think,
be.
oh, maybe I'll pull out my phone and Shazam it. I don't, see if it picks it up, right?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, but that's why I say I'm speaking for myself. Like,
Right.
I would have had just as an amazing experience if I never heard a word of English.
Hmm.
And maybe that's to me the measure of my immersion.
Mm. Well, there's a lot to marinate on there.
I guess so. Yeah. Yeah. You want to hear another one?
I do.
Okay. Um, so this immersion, again, part of the reason I go back to is so compelling that you want to change your behavior and you try to assimilate is that I'm not a wine drinker. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I drink wine and I drink coffee in Italy.
What?
Yes. Mind blown. I know.
No way.
I mean, not a lot of either one, but I did.
I
I
don't know
did.
which I'm more surprised of, actually. I think I'm more surprised about the coffee. How was it?
Amazing. Amazing. Now, let me set the stage. Okay, you want to talk about immersion. For 3 days, we were with the Prandini family. So, I mean, we didn't stay with them, but we were spending most of our waking time with them. So there's Giovanni, Gabriella, and Renato, who are Phil's cousins over
Hmm.
there. They invited us into their home, made us all kinds of food, right? Fed us nonstop, right? At the end of one of the meals, a dinner that we had there, they said, would anybody like coffee? Now, picture yourself in like the warmest of warm homes, just family stuff everywhere. Like every picture, everything has a story. We've been talking about family connections. I mean, it doesn't get much more warm and inviting than
Hmm.
all of that.
Yeah.
And so my natural inclination, being immersed in all of that, is I want to be, as nice and polite as possible. But I also now am thinking, I want to try something a little different,
Hmm.
new. So they said, would anybody like some coffee, after dinner? And I said, I'll try some, figuring it was, something that I had never had before. And even my wife, Linda, turns to me, she goes, you don't drink coffee. Like she was surprised too. And so it comes out in this tiny little mug, and it was black. I mean, it was dark coffee. And I end up taking a sip. I'm like, this is really good. And I drank it all. I drank the whole thing. And to the point that my wife is like, what did you make that in? Like she bought like the little Italian coffee maker that they used and she's getting the same coffee delivered by Amazon, right? So that we can make that here to see if we can make it the same way so that I can drink it here. Um, but that, I mean, and again, I think that goes back to the definition that you want to try something. You've changed your behavior. Normally, I've said I wouldn't drink tea, but being immersed in the family experience and being invited to sit at their dinner table, like
Hmm.
it changed how I behaved, or it changed what I wanted to experience and maybe want to try new things.
Well, first of all, I would like to direct everyone to episode 101 of the Attraction Pros podcast, which is titled Josh Wonders Why Matt Doesn't Drink Coffee and Other Takeaways from a Rare In-Person Recording, which we did in downtown Asheville at a
Yes.
coffee shop where I ordered a coffee and said, "What are you getting?" And you said, "I don't drink coffee." to see why, if you're wondering why my level of shock of you drinking coffee.
Yes.
It's kind of a, well, not to not to use the metaphor or the phrase in a relatively applicable way, but when in Rome, I know you weren't exactly in Rome, right?
Correct. But
But yeah, but
the
kind of
thought went through my head too.
yeah. Of this is what you do. Um Similarly, my so you and coffee is like me and shellfish. I just don't do it, right? But
Okay.
when my wife and I, when we were on our honeymoon in Portugal on the Algarve coast, and we're sitting in a restaurant that is carved into a mountain overlooking the beach at sunset, as we can see all the cliffs and the boats and the swimmers and the surfers, and our server comes over with a giant tray of what a bunch of animals that woke up that morning ready for a good day. You kind of have to, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was would you call it a step outside your comfort zone? I'm talking the coffee and the wine.
Both. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I had no idea if I was going to like it,
Hmm.
especially the coffee because the wine was a different situation. The wine, we were on a food tour of Milano
Hmm.
and we had to stop for cheese, of course, and they served wine with the cheese. So I'm like, well, this is how they do it. I might as well try it. And I liked it. I liked it. Um, I think if I didn't like the wine on the food tour, it would have been less impactful than if I didn't like the coffee. Like I thought, like even if I didn't like the coffee, I probably would have drank it all, like just to be polite.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, I know that the relationship we had built with them would be like, if you don't like it, just don't drink it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So anyway,
You had the permission to not drink it if you didn't want to,
exactly.
because of your level of immersion and your change in behavior and outlook led to the assimilation. And it almost was like it didn't really matter what it tasted like, it sounds like. I mean, it was great that it was, that it was amazing, but it was almost like you were doing it because it's part of the experience. Is that
Absolutely. Yes, that's true.
happy to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I did like it.
that too. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah, that's a bonus.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh
So
man.
I think that's part of where your change your behavior or outlook may come from, in that immersion definition.
Right. Right. You're changing behavior based on the environment that you're in.
Yeah. Yeah.
What example from that would you think of in the attractions industry? I don't normally ride roller coasters, but at an amusement park I do.
Um, I mean, it could be a ride, it could be a food item, it could
Yeah.
be, um, well, I mean, there's so many different experiences and opportunities for you to say yes or no at a park. Like, for example, when I go to a park, I rarely, well, on Coaster NerdCon, I rarely ride anything except coasters, right? But the last time we were at Kings Island with Mark Rosenzweig,
Mhm.
he said, well, let's ride the flume. Like we don't ride flumes, but because he was there, because he was like, he was all excited about it. And, he's like, we got to ride the flume. So we did,
Yeah.
so that was something that I wouldn't necessarily have done without Mark there.
And now kind of being able to say, I rode the log flume at Kings Island with Mark Rosenzweig. Does that add another layer of the story from the trip?
I mean, anything you do with Mark is like elevating the experience. So absolutely,
True.
absolutely. Yeah,
True.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Wow.
Ready for another one?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
This is
This,
cool.
this good. This
Yeah.
kind of harkens back a little bit to the experience on top of the cathedral, but I really found it's such a delicate balance when you've got an immersive experience to, again, like pull you out of it, right?
Huh.
So if you are creating an immersive experience, you've really got to take care of every little detail so that one little thing doesn't pull you out. So one of the things we did when we were in Milano, I want to say that right, is we took a tour of the Last Supper, the original Da Vinci painting of the Last Supper. And of course, there's, like any good tour, there's a couple of rooms before that. They explain the whole thing. It was
Pre-show.
almost destroyed. Well, pre-show, exactly. Almost destroyed. You've got a tour guide, the whole 9 yards. So we get in there and they said, it's timed out very specifically. You've got this much time. So we get in there and first of all, pull back just for a second. Did you know that the Last Supper was actually painted in 3D?
No, I did not know that.
I mean, not officially like glasses 3D, but the way that he painted it, with like certain lines and perspective, there are actually like 3D elements, so it looks like it's not just
Okay.
flat.
Okay.
So anyway,
That makes more sense. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. And there's no water squirting out at you or anything like that. So so after you're actually in the room with the Last Supper, you move into another room where the tour guide is kind of doing her final spiel and things like that. And another tour guide had come in behind us, and that last room is very, very small. We were all like enthralled with this tour guide. She was doing a great job. She had great information, all these, all the great things you want on a tour. And then the other tour guide is in there talking to her tour. So it was like she was pulling our attention away. Like it was very distracting, you know. So could she have waited until we were done to move through and not have two tour guides in there? So my lesson from that was a great immersive experience where we learned a lot, but it was also very easy for that experience to be disrupted. Like it's a very delicate balance.
So it sounds like you're talking about intentionally ensuring that you're focusing your guests' attention towards what you want them to see.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
And that if there is the opportunity to turn away, then that can diminish the experience because they're not getting the value of either what's in front of them, whether it's the painting or it's the tour guide talking. So you should have that. Uh, and also I think like the magnitude of the event of you are just in here with your guide and with your group, you leave, the room is empty, the next group comes into an empty room.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds to me sounds like the way it would operate, right?
Exactly.
And that because there were multiple groups in there at a time, you probably felt a little bit like you were kind of in a theme park queue, right? Or like there were just sort of multiple groups coming in certain segments and kind of hearing the same thing over and over again, having your attention divided. Uh, so yeah, so I think pulling back, it's about making sure that you are focusing your guests' attention towards the experience you want them to have and not letting any peripheral elements get in the way of that.
Yes. And so, of course, that makes me think of goggles, right? Because you can obviously fully control that entire visual experience, right? And
VR goggles, right?
VR goggles. Yes, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah. Um, you could absolutely control that entire experience. And then when you think of, again, let's go back to Harry Potter or Galaxy's Edge. When we talk about immersive experiences, I think my initial sort of definition or thought was you walk into an area where if you look around, everything tells you that you're in that space, right? I
360,
know, go ahead.
360 degrees.
Exactly. So there's nothing that's pulling you out of that experience. I know people talk a lot about that with, sight lines at theme parks where you can see things outside the theme park. I know that was a big deal with Epcot and the Swan and Dolphin, right? When you could see those and like that takes you out of the experience. And like before I would have said not a big deal, but now, I'm like, yeah, maybe that is a big deal, right?
Yeah.
That it pulls you out of that experience.
The other thing too, I talk a lot about like the term escapism,
Yeah.
and you are not in, whether, I mean, escapism and immersion probably, have a lot of very strong similarities with them. Uh, but as far as like you're not thinking about any of the things that you normally do or the things that stress you out or about work or about school or about, struggles with XYZ, the hardships of daily life, if you will, and that the environment supports that and small things can take you out of that if and it's kind of when sometimes when back of house bleeds into front of house. And this doesn't need to be an overly immersive, I say in air quotes, or like heavily themed area or space. I mean, it could be anything. If there is a, I don't know, a podium or something where a person is standing and they're welcoming guests into a space or whatever that looks like, and maybe there's like a clipboard in the pen, and maybe you see a stapler. It's like, well, office supplies don't exist in this world, right? So there is the kind of within the podium, the drawer, the cabinet space to like keep that in or anything like that, or even something as simple as um uh if you uh, don't allow your employees to have drinks with them aside from water while they're like in front of guests, like for I mean, even if they got it, even if you're are a Coke property and they're drinking a Coke product or whatever, even if it's Dasani or whatever it was, I would always ask my team members to peel off the label just so at least it's a clear bottle and
Mm.
actually minimizes the distraction, because otherwise it looks like clutter in this otherwise environment, this small world we're in that doesn't have clutter, that is pristine, right? So there's obviously a lot of factors kind of with that, but as far as like what does that space look like, where is their attention being drawn, and what are some of the things that could compete with where you want them to draw their attention?
Well, and I'm glad you said compete because this is the biggest competition,
Hmm.
right? It's the mobile device
Yes.
because you can create an amazing world. You can have people speaking a different language, but when the text comes in that says, your oil change is ready or whatever it is, like, I mean, boom, that takes your mind right out of that experience, right? So, getting people to me, if the phone is not part of that immersive experience, getting them away from it, having an experience so compelling that I don't even want to check my phone,
Yeah. That'll
right?
be a good behavioral change and outlook on life.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. So let's get to the big one.
All right.
The big one.
This is number
So
five, I believe.
I think so.
Yeah.
But to me, it was one of the biggest aha moments
I
because of
think you gave a
all this.
teaser for this earlier, didn't you?
What's that?
I think you gave a teaser for this
I
earlier.
did. I did. Because of all the things that we've been talking about, a lot of it is from the guest perspective and certainly my consumer perspective of immersion. But as we think about the guest and the employee, the intersection of the guest and employee experience, we can apply all these things to our employees, right?
Okay.
Are we creating an immersive enough experience for our employees so that they want to embrace our culture, so that they are so compelled to be a part and assimilate to the world that we've created that they are our best ambassadors and our best advocates,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
so I started thinking about the very practical things such as punching in
Okay.
and getting your paycheck and all these different things that are very practical have to kind of experiences, but does that also take people out of the experience? The team members.
Yeah.
I think about orientation programs and how Sean McKeough calls them induction, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a way to make them more immersive than just here's your paperwork and here's your, here are the company values and those type of things. So it just really got me thinking about creating this immersive environment for our teams as much as we create the immersive environment for our guests, because we're asking our team members to create that immersive environment as well. Something as simple also as a break room, right? You're out in the wizarding world of Harry Potter and you want your teams to feel like they're out there so that they're creating that guest experience. And then they walk through the backstage door and it's all beige, right? And then they walk into a break room where's there's just a couch, a microwave, a coffee maker. Now there could be, like you talk about escapism, maybe I need to escape the job for just a second. But there may also be an argument to be made to keep people immersed in that whole experience. I don't know, it was just something that really hit me. Like, we could do such a better job to immerse our teams in the language that we want them to speak and the behaviors we want them to display and all those things that goes way beyond, your company expectations. It goes beyond your KPIs. It goes beyond reviews, all those practical things, and really creates an environment where your team is, I'll go back to the definition, the experience of being a team member is so compelling that you change your behavior or outlook. You try to assimilate and you take on the characteristics of the surroundings.
Yeah, and I think some of the ways to do that would be to look back at kind of the four other key points that you mentioned of like what is that definition of immersion, and knowing that the more immersed they are, you don't want to pull them out of it. You talk about what those behavioral changes really look like that happen on the clock and off the clock and
Mm,
off property, right? Because they're still representing the company, but they're actually representing themselves and their identity as being a part of the company, right?
yeah,
Uh, and then focusing their attention towards where you want that to be with that immersive experience, and yeah, looking at what does that break room look like in terms of does it match what you are delivering for your guest experience in the same mindset. So
absolutely.
just to think about there.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I'll share one more really quick thing that has nothing to do with immersion, but it has
Cool.
everything to do with expectations and guest experience.
All
So,
right.
so Phil's wife, Judy, is the one who really did a lot of the planning for this trip,
Mhm.
right? And when we got over there, I was the one with the Uber app, right? So I was the one getting the Ubers and, that kind of thing. And at one point, she made a comment about, she did all the planning. So there's lots of expectations. She's worried about the hotels we're staying at. Will we like them? That kind of thing, because she chose them and all that kind of stuff. And she said something to the effect of, it's nice to not have the pressure of getting the rides, to and from restaurants and things like that, because there was obviously she felt a lot of pressure in putting the whole thing together. So I thought of that, when you talk about expectations and you talk about, even to the point where, you know, it's harder and harder to meet or even, understand guest expectations sometimes, but that's a whole level of expectation that no restaurant, no hotel, no Uber driver can anticipate because it's all her putting it on herself. So I think the takeaway from that is don't underestimate the amount of time, effort, and energy that people put into the planning, because that's contributing as much to the expectation as your advertising and their previous experiences.
Yeah. Good point. And I think it's
Yeah.
something that people don't always see because they see the end product. They see
Yes,
the when it goes well, they don't see all the inner workings that led to that end product and that end result.
absolutely.
So having
Absolutely.
appreciation for that is pretty important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those and a couple of pounds with all the food were my takeaways from Italy.
All right. And some coffee and some wine.
Yeah, coffee and wine. Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was my pleasure. And you got them all kind of listed out. So we've got some good talking points for the future. I think it's really cool to kind of continue to evolve this whole conversation about immersion.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to hear any feedback from our audience on this episode as far as aligning with this new definition you've presented of immersive experiences and perhaps what could be expanded onto it and evolved even further.
And if I go on another trip, it might change again.
Might change again.
So you never know. You never know. Well, thank you, Josh, for allowing me to kind of relive my experience in Italy. We had a great time. And for everybody out there who's watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.
Don't you mean siamo tutti attraction pros?